New Year's Eve, a night of excitement, countdowns, and dreams of new beginnings. But for some, it's a night that marks the start of nightmares they can never escape. As the world celebrates under fireworks, shadows creep closer, and the unexplainable begins. These are 5 creepy true New Year's Eve horror stories that will leave you questioning what really lurks in the dark as the clock strikes midnight. Sarah had always loved New Year's Eve. It was a night of fresh starts, filled with celebrations and the promise of better things ahead. This year, though, she decided to spend the night alone in her cozy apartment, escaping the chaos of parties and festivities. The quiet seemed like the perfect way to reflect on the year gone by. Her friends had canceled last minute, and with a glass of wine in hand, she settled in front of the TV. But as the clock ticked closer to midnight, an unsettling feeling began to take over. Something was wrong, something in the air felt different. She couldn't put her finger on it. It wasn't the usual calm she cherished. The silence in the apartment felt almost too heavy. Her phone buzzed with a New Year's Eve text from a friend. "Happy New Year. You good?" She texted back quickly, but the uneasy feeling didn't go away. As the fireworks outside began to light up the sky, she heard it. Tuck, tuck. It was a soft knock at the door. She froze. Who could that be? Sarah wasn't expecting anyone. She glanced at the clock. It was just past 11:30 p.m. Maybe it was a neighbor, but the timing was off. No one came over to visit on New Year's, even less they were invited. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She approached the door cautiously, checking the peephole. The hallway was dark, empty. The buzzing in her ears made it harder to focus. She opened the door. Nothing. Just the cold draft of the hallway air sweeping into her apartment. But then she noticed something strange. A small, crumpled piece of paper was lying on the floor just inside her threshold. Sarah bent down, hesitating for a moment before picking it up. The handwriting was jagged, as if hurried or nervous. "I'm outside. Let me in." Her breath caught in her throat. Who would leave a note like that? Her pulse quickened. She hadn't heard anyone knock. Had she been hearing things? Her eyes darted back to the door, the hallway beyond still empty. In a rush of anxiety, she slammed the door shut and double-checked the locks, the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. She turned away from the door and tried to shake off the feeling. Maybe it was some prank, maybe a neighbor just playing a joke. But as she walked back to her living room, she could still feel the tension in the air. The room felt colder. She walked to the kitchen to pour another glass of wine, but as she did, the knock came again. This time louder, harder. Tuck, tuck, tuck. Her breath caught in her throat. Sarah rushed back to the door and looked through the peephole, but all she saw was an empty hallway. Just a dark, silent space. No one. "Okay, calm down," she whispered to herself. "You're imagining things. It's just a bad joke." But then, she heard it. A voice. Soft, almost a whisper, but coming from the other side of the door. "Sarah, I know you're in there." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. How did the voice know her name? How could someone be outside her door if she hadn't seen anyone? The chill in her spine grew stronger as she backed away from the door. Her mind raced with questions. Who is it? What did they want? The voice came again. "Sarah, you're not alone. Open the door." Her phone buzzed with a message from a friend. "You okay? You're really quiet tonight." She typed quickly, trying to sound normal. "Yeah, just staying in. It's been a quiet night." But as she typed, the knocking started again. It was relentless, louder than before, now accompanied by a low, guttural scraping sound on the wood. Sarah felt her knees go weak, her thoughts swirling. Should she call the police? What if it was just someone playing a prank? Or worse, what if it wasn't? She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The operator picked up immediately. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my door, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I can hear them knocking, and they know my name. They said my name. The dispatcher tried to calm her down. Stay calm, ma'am. Help is on the way. Lock all doors and windows. As Sarah held the phone to her ear, the knocking stopped. Just like that. Silence. But that silence was worse than the noise. She could feel the air around her grow heavier, thicker. And then she heard it again. "Sarah, you can't hide." The whisper was so close, it felt like the voice was right behind her. She turned around in a panic, expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Nothing but the shadows of her apartment, the flickering light of the TV casting eerie shapes on the walls. But when Sarah glanced at the door again, she saw something. A shadow, just a shadow, but it was moving. She backed away slowly, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The temperature had dropped. The walls felt like they were closing in. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the dispatcher. "We're outside your building. Are you safe?" As she turned to the door once more, the door handle slowly began to turn. The handle clicked, turning ever so slowly, as if someone was testing the lock. Sarah felt her legs go weak as she dropped to the floor, her mind racing with panic. The door creaked open a few inches, and she heard a soft chuckle on the other side. "Sarah, I told you you can't hide." Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Sarah gasped and scrambled back into her bedroom, locking the door behind her. Her phone buzzed once more. Help is on the way. But no help had come. The footsteps stopped outside her room. Silence fell again. The police arrived minutes later, but the hallway was empty. No one was there. The door to her apartment was locked. No sign of any intruder. But when Sarah checked the doorframe, she noticed something. A small, handwritten note had been slipped under the door. "I'll be back next year." The police found no trace of the mysterious visitor. There was no record of anyone entering the building. No camera footage, no evidence, nothing. But every year since that night, as the clock strikes midnight, Sarah still hears that voice. Still feels that knock. She knows deep down that the stranger is still out there, waiting for next year. Emma had spent the past few months trying to rebuild her life after a rough breakup. When she found the small, affordable apartment downtown, it seemed like a perfect place to start fresh. The landlord, an older man with a stiff smile, had been eager to rent it out. "It's quiet," he'd said almost too quickly as he handed her the keys. "Perfect for someone like you." The building had an eerie charm, with its creaking wooden floors and vintage decor. But Emma noticed a few odd things during her move. The other tenants seemed unusually distant. A woman on the second floor avoided eye contact entirely, and an elderly man on the first floor muttered something under his breath when she passed him in the hall. But Emma ignored it all, chalking it up to city life. Tonight was New Year's Eve, and instead of going out, she planned to watch the fireworks from her balcony and enjoy some peace. She didn't know that peace was the last thing she'd find. At 11 p.m., the strange occurrences began. Emma was unpacking a box when she felt a cold draft sweep through the room. She checked the windows and doors, but everything was shut tight. Shrugging it off, she returned to her task. 15 minutes later, she heard it, the first tap. A soft but deliberate knock against the living room window. Emma froze. She turned toward the sound, her heart already beating faster. The window faced a fire escape, but she lived on the 4th floor. No one could reach it without climbing, and she hadn't seen anyone outside earlier. Mustering her courage, she approached slowly and peeked through the curtain. Nothing was there. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "It's just my imagination," she whispered, returning to the couch. But then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. Emma's stomach tightened. She approached the window again, pulling the curtain aside quickly. Still nothing. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, making her jump. It was a text from her best friend, Mia. "Happy almost New Year. Wish you were here. Everything okay?" Emma hesitated before replying. She didn't want to sound paranoid, so she typed it quick. "All good. Just staying in." Just as she hit send, a new sound filled the room, a faint whisper. Emma. Her name. soft, drawn out, and coming from the window. Her chest tightened as she backed away, her eyes locked on the glass. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking. There was no answer, only silence. But the uneasy feeling in her chest grew. She checked the locks on the balcony door and turned on every light in the apartment. At 11:45 p.m., things took a darker turn. The tapping returned, but this time it wasn't just on the window. It came from the walls, the ceiling, and even the floor beneath her feet. She felt surrounded. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic symphony of voices, all saying her name. The TV flickered on by itself, showing nothing but static. Emma's breath hitched as a shadowy figure appeared on the screen. It was hard to make out, but it seemed to be staring directly at her. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment began to flicker, plunging her into brief moments of darkness. And in one of those dark flashes, she saw it. The figure was standing on her balcony, tall, skeletal, and unnaturally still. It was silhouetted against the faint glow of fireworks in the distance. Emma's pulse raced as she backed away, her trembling hand reaching for her phone. The figure moved closer to the glass, its hollow eyes locking onto hers. It raised a bony hand and tapped on the window. Tap, tap, tap. Emma screamed and ran to her bedroom, slamming the door shut and locking it. She called the police, her voice barely steady enough to explain the situation. The tapping didn't stop. It grew louder, angrier, until the glass finally shattered. She heard heavy footsteps enter the apartment. Then silence. When the police arrived, they found Emma huddled in her closet, shaking uncontrollably. But the rest of the apartment was untouched. The balcony door was intact, the glass unbroken, and the fire escape showed no signs of anyone climbing it. The officers assured her it was probably just stress or a prank, but Emma knew better. As they left, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. On the living room window, there was a faint handprint, too large to be human. Emma moved out within a week, but the memory haunted her. Every New Year's Eve, she swears she hears the same sound, no matter where she is. Daniel had always hated New Year's Eve. The noise, the crowds, the expectations, it just wasn't his thing. This year, after a particularly rough year at work, he decided to spend the evening alone in his apartment. He bought some snacks, cracked open a bottle of whiskey, and planned on watching the ball drop from the comfort of his couch. It was going to be a quiet night of reflection, but as the evening grew darker, a sense of unease crept over him. Every year, there was a constant sense of anticipation in the air. Everyone excited for what the new year might bring. But for Daniel, it felt like the complete opposite, like something was wrong, something waiting to happen. As midnight approached, Daniel turned on the TV, trying to shake the strange feeling, but that's when it started. At first, it was subtle, a strange sound coming from the hallway, faint but noticeable. It was like a soft scratching, like someone lightly tapping their fingers against the wall. Daniel paused, unsure if he was just hearing things. He had heard stories about old buildings making weird noises, but something about this felt different. The scratching continued, growing louder, as though it was moving closer to his apartment. Daniel's heart rate picked up as the sound turned into a rhythmic tapping, almost like someone knocking in a pattern. It didn't make sense. His neighbors were supposed to be out celebrating, or at least that's what he assumed. Curiosity mixed with anxiety, and against his better judgment, Daniel stood up to investigate. He walked cautiously to his front door, listening intently. The knocking grew louder, almost frantic, yet when he opened the peephole to look out, there was nothing, no one. Just empty hallways stretching in both directions. The sense of dread started to grow. He closed the door, locked it, and returned to the couch, trying to focus on the TV. But then, something even stranger happened. The knocking returned. Only this time, it wasn't at his door. It came from inside his apartment. His mind raced. There was no one else in the apartment. No way for anyone to be inside without him noticing. But the sound, it was unmistakable. The knocking, no longer subtle, was now right next to him. Daniel stood up in a panic, heart pounding in his chest. He checked every room, his breath shaky as he moved from room to room. The knocking persisted, louder and faster now, coming from every corner of the apartment. He looked under the furniture, checked the closets, but saw nothing. There was no explanation. The sound of the knocking escalated into something more disturbing. Suddenly, it was as if multiple people were knocking at once, surrounding him. It was deafening, like the walls themselves were shaking from the force of the knocks. Daniel's vision blurred, his mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Then, through the chaos of the knocking, he heard something that made his blood freeze. 10, 9, 8. It was a voice counting down, eerily calm, as if the world around him was slowly starting to unravel. The voice was deep, low, and filled with malice. It seemed to echo off every wall in his apartment. His pulse raced as the seconds ticked away. 7, 6, 5. Daniel ran to the door, his mind screaming for him to escape, but the door wouldn't open. It was as if something or someone was holding it shut from the outside. The countdown continued. 4, 3, 2. His entire body was shaking now. His stomach churned as the knocking stopped. The silence was deafening, and then a voice whispered from behind him, so close he could feel it against his skin. 1. The lights flickered. The air grew heavy. Daniel stood frozen, unable to move, his breath caught in his throat. The clock struck midnight, and with it, a single loud bang sounded in the apartment, like something had exploded inside his walls. He spun around, but there was nothing. No one. His apartment was empty. Everything was as it should be. But then he noticed something chilling. On the back of the TV screen, which was still glowing faintly from the countdown broadcast, a single word appeared, written in what seemed to be smeared blood. Help! Daniel's heart pounded in his chest as the screen went black. The silence in the room was suffocating. His pulse raced as he realized that the knocking, the countdown, the eerie whisper, it was all connected to something far worse than he could ever imagine. The next day, Daniel found that his apartment had been untouched. There was no sign of the strange events that had happened the night before. But every year since, as the clock struck midnight, Daniel could hear it again. The knocking, the whispering countdown, and the terrifying word that would always appear on his screen. Help! New Year's Eve was meant to be a celebration. For Rachel, it was a time to enjoy with friends and put the year behind her. She had invited a few of her close friends over to her apartment for a cozy get-together. The champagne was chilling, the music was playing softly, and laughter filled the air as they counted down to midnight. It was a perfect night, or so it seemed. Rachel didn't notice the stranger at first. She was busy laughing with her friends when, out of the corner of her eye, she saw someone standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat, his face obscured by shadows. For a split second, she thought he was one of her friend's partners, but when she looked again, he wasn't moving. Rachel casually glanced at her friends, but they were all laughing, enjoying the music, and completely oblivious to the figure in the doorway. The stranger wasn't making any noise. He wasn't even moving, just standing there, watching her. The room suddenly felt colder, and Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Why had no one noticed him? Why was he just standing there, staring? She quickly made her way to the kitchen, her footsteps light and hesitant. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man didn't respond. He remained frozen, unmoving, his eyes fixated on her. Rachel could feel the hair on the back of her neck stand up. There was something wrong about the way he stood there, as if he didn't belong, as if he was out of place in this gathering of friends and celebration. She glanced at her friends again, who were still laughing and talking, as though they hadn't even noticed the figure standing just a few feet away from them. She turned back to the man and repeated, "Can I help you?" Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke in a low, raspy voice, "I've come for you." Rachel froze. The words sent a chill down her spine. as if the temperature in the room had dropped several degrees in an instant. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "You shouldn't have invited me." The room grew colder still, and Rachel felt a sense of dread wash over her. She turned to leave the kitchen and call for help, but when she looked back, the man was gone. At first, she thought it was just her imagination. Maybe it had been some strange trick of the light or a figment of her nervous mind. But when she stepped back into the living room, her blood ran cold. There, in the middle of the room, on the coffee table, was a small note. Rachel picked it up, her hands trembling. The note was written in smeared, messy handwriting. "It's already too late." The room suddenly felt stifling, as if the air was thick with an invisible weight. Rachel tried to call her friends over, but they were still oblivious, still caught up in their own conversations, unaware of the eerie presence that had just infiltrated their gathering. She turned back to the door, wanting to leave, but there was something else, something strange. The door was locked, the handle completely still as if it had been frozen in place. Her panic deepened as she backed away from the door, her mind racing with fear. "You shouldn't have invited me." The man's words echoed in her head. But who was he? How had he gotten in? And why was no one else aware of him? She rushed to the window and pulled back the curtains, only to find nothing but the dark street outside. No cars, no signs of life. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The entire apartment plunged into darkness, and the sound of footsteps began. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Rachel's heart raced as she searched for her friends, but they still didn't seem to notice anything unusual. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and closer, until they were almost right behind her. She spun around, but the man was nowhere to be found. There was only a faint smell of decay lingering in the air. At the stroke of midnight, Rachel's phone vibrated in her pocket. She took it out, hoping to contact someone, anyone, to help her. But when she looked at the screen, her blood ran cold. There was a text message from an unknown number. "I told you not to invite me." The sound of a door slamming open echoed through the apartment, sending a wave of terror through her body. She turned to see the front door wide open, the dark hallway beyond it stretching into an abyss. The figure in the dark coat was standing at the doorway, staring at her with hollow eyes, and then, without a word, he disappeared into the night. Rachel stood frozen, unable to move, her mind reeling. The party had ended, but the terror was just beginning. The man had left, but something told her that he would never truly be gone. Emily had always loved New Year's Eve. The excitement in the air, the hope for new beginnings. It was her favorite time of the year. She had spent the evening with friends, partying until the clock struck midnight. As the cheers and fireworks echoed in the streets, she felt a strange sense of peace come over her. But little did she know, this year's celebration would be her last normal one for a very long time. She was alone now in her apartment, the last of her friends having left just an hour ago. She had taken a long shower to wash away the chaos of the night, and as she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, she smiled at her reflection. The cold water had rejuvenated her, and she felt ready to welcome the new year. But as her smile faded, something in the reflection caught her eye. It wasn't her. Build up. At first, Emily thought she was seeing things, perhaps due to the exhaustion from the night. But as she stared into the mirror, her reflection remained still, too still. The smile on her face was gone, replaced by an emotionless expression. Her reflection didn't match her own movements. She raised her hand to touch her hair, and the reflection's hand didn't follow. Instead, the reflection's eyes seemed to follow her every move, but the face itself stayed blank, locked in that unsettling stare. Emily's heart began to pound as she stepped back from the mirror, shaking her head. "It's just the lighting," she whispered to herself. "It's nothing." But as she turned to leave, her reflection did not. The face in the mirror remained, staring back at her, and slowly, a smile began to form on the reflection's lips. A smile that Emily did not make. Frozen in place, Emily tried to step closer to the mirror, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The reflection's smile grew wider, more sinister, and as it did, a chill swept through the room. She could feel a presence, cold and oppressive, surrounding her. Her body was trembling as the reflection in the mirror began to move on its own. It didn't mirror her actions anymore. It was a living, breathing thing, completely separate from Emily. The reflection's hand reached up, pressing against the glass as if trying to push through. "Who are you?" Emily whispered, her voice barely a sound. The reflection didn't answer, but the smile grew. The glass of the mirror began to fog up from the inside, as if something was trying to escape. Then, the reflection's face twisted into something grotesque, its eyes hollow and black, the skin around its lips curling into a distorted grin. The voice came, sharp and cold, a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I'm you?" Emily's legs buckled beneath her as she stumbled backward, eyes wide with terror. She could hear the voice coming from the mirror, echoing in her mind. But she couldn't look away. She couldn't escape the pull of those black eyes, the smirk that was becoming more malicious by the second. Suddenly, the reflection's hand slammed against the mirror, causing it to crack. The force of it made the entire room seem to tremble. Emily screamed and ran out of the bathroom, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she fled, she could still hear the voice, whispering just behind her. "I'm still here." The next morning, Emily woke up with a headache and a deep sense of dread. She tried to shake off the nightmare, but something about last night lingered. She walked into the bathroom, hoping that it had all just been a bad dream. But when she looked into the mirror, there it was again. This time it was different. There was no smile, no expression of terror. It was just a blank face staring back at her. But then, just as Emily reached for the faucet, her reflection's eyes glinted with malice. And in a voice that was barely audible, the reflection whispered, "You didn't think I'd let you go, did you?" The mirror shattered with a loud crash, leaving Emily standing in front of it, shaking uncontrollably. The pieces of glass scattered across the floor, and the last thing Emily heard before everything went silent was the soft, eerie laugh coming from the shattered shards, as though the reflection was still there, waiting to drag her back.